Hey, what's up, guys? Thank you for tuning in to another episode. Once again, my name is MCV and I'm your host. Now, if you listened to my intro, I mentioned that I will be sharing stories, some that are lived experiences. The content in this next episode is based on the real life experience of myself and someone very close to me. Up next is a story of when they say to you, "This is it." And your response is, "Nope, not by a long shot." This one is called "You Almost Had Me There for a While." Why are you here? Why are you in this classroom? Why do you insist on wasting mine and the other educators' time? In fact, why are you taking up space in this room that someone more willing and able to learn could use? Nick smiled as these questions from past teachers echoed in her mind. She closed her eyes for a moment before taking her next steps, her entire face aglow with happiness radiating through her body. Nick thought to herself, "I deserve to feel this joy. I deserve to embrace it. This is me. I did this." The moment those thoughts entered her mind, Nick swore she felt the sun on her left cheek warmer than any other part of her body. "Thank you," she whispered. "I felt your kiss. I know it's you, Graham. Thank you for being here with me today. I can feel it in my heart. I can feel how proud you are of me. My only wish is that you were here in person, in flesh, so I could show you just how much this means to me and to my children." Somewhere in the distance, Nick heard her voice, her name being called over the PA system. Yes, today was her day. This day was the culmination of her countless sleepless nights. Today, the words of her former teachers did not bring Nick to tears with shame and feelings of worthlessness. Today, those words filled her with pride and validation. Today, Nicolette Shante Winters had finally exceeded all expectations. She had exceeded the limitations that were placed before her by the ones who were supposed to encourage her, but instead had used their words to break her down. Words she didn't think she'd ever stop hearing as she closed her eyes to sleep at night. Words that she heard each time a supervisor yelled at her and threatened to fire her for the simplest of mistakes. Words that kept her from ever believing that she deserved more or that anyone would ever take a chance on her. To Nick, that very first misguided mistake she had made had turned out to be a stamp, cementing the type of future that she, an impoverished young woman, was destined to have. Plus, there was her environment. She had been set up for generations to have this future. There was no way around it. There was no getting out for her. This was it. And even if she did find an opportunity, her mistake had ensured she would remain right here. At least, that's what Nick heard all her life. And because of the circumstances surrounding her, she'd believed every word of it. With warm tears running down her cheeks, Nick took a small step, then another slightly larger one. Then, as if being woken up from a deep slumber, she rushed onto the podium, shoulders straight, head held high, a smile splitting her face. She whispered, "Y'all almost had me there for a while." Girl, girl, you need to get your ass up out of that bed and do something with your life. I already told you, I'm not taking care of that baby in your belly. When your daddy left me high and dry with you, I had to struggle to put food in your stomach and clothes on your back. You couldn't even walk yet. I had to beg your grandma to watch you, and she always had the most to say before she'd let me leave you with her. Nick rolled over onto this narrow, worn-out looking couch that always squeaked whenever someone occupied it, as if it could no longer carry the extra weight. Nick had been sleeping on the couch for the past decade. The couch had become her bedroom around the time her mother began entertaining company at home during the early hours of the evening. According to her mother, Nick, at age 5, was too old to be sleeping in her mommy's bedroom. This morning, and still a few months shy of her 15th birthday, Nick continued to use the worn-out couch as a bed at night. since the tiny one-bedroom apartment she shared with her mother offered no extra space. As Nick listened to her mother in the kitchen preparing her morning coffee, Nick took a moment to reflect on some of her earlier decisions. This morning was no different than the feeling she felt for the past few months, each morning after she woke up. Regretful. Regret was the first feeling to register each day the moment she opened her eyes, and not much changed by the time she went to bed at the end of the day. Nick was still struggling with the direction her life had taken. She had plans for her future, not that she had ever shared any of those plans with anyone, too afraid that they would laugh in her face. But yes, she did have plans for her future. Once upon a time. These days, the only plan she could make was to survive from morning to night, then at night pray that she would survive long enough to see the following morning. Although, there were mornings when she would wake up and regret having made it through another night. Nick was not yet 15, but she had already proven her doubters right. She had already proven to them that everything they had anticipated about her had indeed come to fruition. Nick was now fully convinced that she really was a waste of time and space. There had been a time when Nick believed that there was one person that she would always be able to count on, someone who would always have her back. She believed it because he had reassured her of this more times than she could count. That person was her boyfriend of 2 years, Anton Canty, known in their neighborhood as AK. But 4 months earlier, AK had dumped her. AK had walked away from her and their relationship without a word or a backward glance. She had just told him that she was late for a second consecutive month with her period. Throughout their budding romance, AK had spoken to her on plenty of occasions about wanting to have a family someday. He was not sure about getting married, though, but he was adamant about wanting no less than 4 children. However, on the day that Nick told him that there was a chance that he would have his first child in about 7 months, AK miraculously sprouted wings and took off. Nick had met AK when she had moved up from the elementary school into the 6th grade. Although he was 2 grades ahead of her and 3 years younger, neither had an issue with the age difference between them. Because of Nick's physical appearance, she was often mistaken for someone in the 8th grade and occasionally a high schooler. AK had confidence in Nick. AK had confided in Nick that he had seen her around their neighborhood a few times, but he'd never had the courage to approach her because each time he saw her, she was always accompanied by her scary ass looking mother, as he had so eloquently put it. But now that they were both in middle school, he could see her without ever crossing paths with her mother. They only had 1 year in the same building, and AK wanted to make sure to make the use of their shared time together in such close proximity. AK told Nick that he had had a crush on her for about 2 years before the first time they'd actually spoken. Nick was taken aback at first by the fact that someone she thought was the hottest guy in the neighborhood could really be interested in her. Was he blind? Didn't he see all the other beautiful girls who lived around him? The ones who were better dressed than she was? The ones who were always rocking the latest fashion trends? But AK was persistent, though. Nick was the one he wanted. And so, not long after, Nick let down her guard and gave in to AK's charms. Although Nick and AK did not have any classes together and seeing each other outside of school was not an option, they found their way to spend time together. The children often ditched their classes, electing to spend the period inside of an abandoned structure, which was only a couple of blocks away from the school building. By the age of 13, Nick had already been sexually active for an entire year without anyone outside of her friends group, including her mother, knowing her secret. The fact that she was ignored by most of her teachers and already cast off as someone who would not amount to anything, who also had the bleakest of future ahead of her, Nick's absence in many of her classes went unreported or maybe just unnoticed. Either way, Nick was able to miss classes whenever she had something better to do with her time and never being penalized. She was told by both her mother and teachers that education was not for her. School was not where she needed to waste her time being. No one expected her to make it through high school. Already having difficulty understanding or keeping up with assignments, Nick allowed those words to take root in her mind. And each day, as she made her way to school, she questioned why she was even wasting her time. But then she would remember that at school was where she was able to spend time with her boyfriend, AK. When the realization first hit her that she might be pregnant, Nick thought this must have been a blessing from God. In her mind, her mother would kick her out of the house and she would move in with AK and his family. Once the baby came, AK's grandmother would watch over the child during the day while both Nick and AK went to work. After some time, they would have saved enough money that would allow them to move into their own apartment. Beyond that, Nick was hoping that as new parents, her and AK would learn and grow together, and when they were ready, they would add to their little family. No more unexpected surprises. Instead, Nick was still living at home, and AK was nowhere in sight. Months went by, and Nick finally gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Becoming a single mother at age 15 was a life that Nick never imagined happening. But here she was. Nick's mother used every opportunity to remind Nick that she and her baby were not wanted in her home. But she was only allowing them to stay with her because of what everyone would say or think of her if she threw out her only child on the street. When the baby was about 6 months old, Nick could no longer put up with her mother's incessant complaining. When a young man on her block expressed his interest in her, Nick did not hesitate to take him up on his offer to help her provide for her son. Within a few weeks, and despite the young man still living at home with his mother, grandmother, and siblings, Nick decided to move in with him the moment the topic was brought up. Nick was not particularly enthused about moving in with the young fellow, but she needed to get away from her mother. Not knowing who her father was, or whether he had family who would take her in, Nick was left with this as her only option. Nick knew that had her grandmother still been alive, she would have taken her and the baby to live with her. But sadly, the older woman had lost her battle with breast cancer a few months before Nick entered middle school. Although Nick never lived with the woman, Nick believed that her maternal grandmother was the only person on the planet who cared about her and who didn't think she was a lost cause. Nick had spent most of her days with her grandmother, only returning to her mother's apartment at night when her grandmother left for her overnight shift with the cleaning company she worked for in the city. Nick's son was barely 1 year old when she found out that she was pregnant with her second and third children. Not yet 16, and already babies number 2 and 3 was on the way. Nick thought. Thankfully, her new boyfriend did not take the news of his impending fatherhood the same way AK had. But then, a few months into her pregnancy, things took a downturn in her relationship, bringing it to a halt. Nick found herself single once again and back home with her mother. And instead of one baby, Nick returned home with 3 children in tow. Her second pregnancy had resulted in a pair of twin girls. If she hadn't noticed it before, Nick was now convinced that her life was truly over. She hadn't even made it past her freshman year of high school. Nick had no marketable skills, and even though she had graduated middle school, Nick still had the academic intelligence of a 4th grader, and that's not counting mathematics. At least, at age 16, she was old enough to work legally. But what will she do? Who's going to hire her? Then there were the 3 babies. She had no one to watch over them, and she didn't think she'd ever make enough money to cover a babysitter or a daycare. Nick thought of dropping the children off at one of the hospitals a few towns away, but she loved her kids too much to never see them again. She thought of giving them up to a family for a while, someone who would understand that the arrangement was only temporary, that as soon as Nick was on her feet, she'd be returning for her children. But who was she kidding? No one would ever agree to such an arrangement. If Nick wanted to be in her children's life, there was only one option: find a way to keep them with her and provide for them at the same time. Then, as it turned out, Nick ran into the grandmother of her twin daughters one day on the train as she was returning home from a job interview. The woman expressed how badly she wanted to be in her grandchildren's life. This was the break Nick needed, Nick thought to herself. If she could get the woman to agree to keep all three children with her during the day, then Nick could start working. Granted, she got the job. The conversation with the older woman proved to be a turning point in Nick's life, along with the phone call she received later that morning informing her that she had gotten the job. With this, Nick vowed to stay away from men. She was going to focus on providing for herself and her children until they were old enough to provide for themselves. More than 10 years later, Nick now lives in a two-bedroom apartment with her three children. Nick's oldest son has entered middle school. He was a great kid, very protective of his mother and sisters. Nick was not happy about the state of her life at that moment, but it was better than anything she could have wished for. Nick worked two jobs during the day and had another part-time position a few hours at night. Her son was old enough to watch over his siblings, and her neighbor across the hallway also kept an eye on things while she was at work. Although Nick was working three jobs, technically, she had one promise that she had made to her children years earlier and refused to break it. Nick had to be home each morning to see her children before they left for school, and she had to have dinner with them every evening. One evening, as they was having dinner, Dante, the oldest child, asked his mother to help him with his homework. Nick bowed her head and pretended not to hear the child. Dante repeated a little louder, "Mom, will you help me with my homework after dinner? I tried doing it on my own after school, but I couldn't understand any of the concepts." This felt like a knife to Nick's throat. The children always did their homework with the neighbor or an after-school program, so she never had to worry about not knowing how to help before. Faking a bravado she didn't feel, Nick asked her son to show her what he needed help with. The child ran into the bedroom, returning moments later with a thick textbook in one hand and a notebook and pencil in the other. Opening the book, he flipped to a section somewhere in the middle of the paperback, then placed it in front of his mother. Nick took a deep breath, then glanced down at the book in front of her. For all Nick knew, this could all be written in a different language. She was supposed to be looking at mathematics, but this did not look like anything she remembered. Thinking quickly, Nick faked not being able to see clearly what was written on the paper in front of her. Wow, I can't make out any of these words. Why do they have to write so small? Dante was wise beyond his years. His mother was trying to hide the fact that even she didn't understand the problem, but he saw through it. Dante felt bad for embarrassing his mother. He should have known. After all, he was the one who always read his sisters a bedtime story while his mother sat with them, praising him for doing such a wonderful job, for being so smart. Quietly retrieving the textbook, Dante responded to his mother's query. "It's all right, Mom. I think I get it now. I just needed to see it from a different angle," the kid lied. The following day, on her break between jobs, Nick made her way to Dante's school to speak with one of his teachers about recommending a tutor for her son. Nick knew that she would most likely have to take on yet another job, but she was determined to do everything in her power to set her children up for success. It was the night of his middle school graduation when the subject would finally be broached again. Dante was about to enter high school with perfect grades, despite participating in multiple sports and other extracurricular activities throughout the school year. "Mom," he began, as they sat down to dinner that evening, "we think you are the best mother that anyone could ever ask for. You make sure we have everything that we ever need, and some that we don't need but just want. But I want to ask you something. You don't have to say yes now, But can you think about it? Okay, Mom, the child said, sounding hopeful. Okay, little man, what is it? Nick asked. Well, I know you didn't graduate high school because of me, Dante began. Nick cut him off. No, I did not graduate high school because of me. I do not regret having the best son that anyone could ever ask for. But I will tell you that I was not ready to be a mother when I had you. I know, but you're still the best mom that anyone can ask for. But like I was saying, I know that you did not graduate high school. Okay. And Nick cut him off again skeptically. Well, I think you can go back to school instead of working at nights to pay for my tutor, which I no longer need. You can go to school. You can even do it on the computer at the library if you don't want to be in a classroom anymore. Dante, what are you talking about? I'm too old for school. No, you're not. You know Miss Ethel, right? Well, Miss Ethel's daughter is older than you, he said, speaking of the elderly neighbor across the hall. Yes, and well, Miss Ethel said that her daughter never finished high school either, and now she's going back to school. She's going to be a nurse when she's finished. Nick pondered that bit of news for a moment. She had never gotten over the look in her son's eyes that night a few years earlier when she could not help him with his homework. It was not embarrassment. It was more like guilt. Did she really say that? Has her daughter really gone back to school? Nick asked pensively, a thought forming in her brain. Maybe she could give school one more try. At least, if she got a GED, she could apply for a promotion at the fast food restaurant where she worked full time. The restaurant had been a revolving door for employees, yet she had remained. Most had only stayed until they left for college. She now had a manager who attended community college but was planning on giving up the position in the fall when he moved out of state to attend university. Okay, baby, I will talk to Miss Ethel and see if I can find something that works. All right? Dante knew that his mother's answer was not a yes, but he could not help the smile spreading across his face. Then a thought entered Dante's mind. Mom, what if we graduate high school together? I mean, I can help you with your work since mine would still have the work fresher in my brain. Nick could not stop the smile that crested her lip. Her son's smile was contagious. Then she too had a thought. What if this worked out and she made it all the way to college? That had been 12 years earlier. It had taken Nick longer to get her GED than she had anticipated, but the look of joy on her children's face when she told them that she had decided to return to school was her biggest motivating factor. Following her GED, Nick had gone to community college for 2 years before getting a scholarship to a 4-year university. Her hard work had paid off. Once she graduated with a teaching degree, Nick had continued studying to become a social worker. As Nick cast a gaze across the crowded room, she spotted her children sitting together. Dante stood and gave a loud whistle. You did it, Mom! He screamed over the voices of cheering families. Her son, her angel, had graduated medical school the week before and was about to begin his residency at one of the local hospitals in the area. No, we did it, Nick said to no one in particular. As she accepted her diploma, instead of saying thank you, Nick said, They told me I didn't have a future, but they lied. They were wrong. My future has never been brighter.